So I recognize that there is currently snow on the ground, but have faith, we aren't too far away from it just yet. Soon the air is going to turn warmer, the sun is going to be out, and you'll see them pop up and display their vibrant colors for all to see. Yes, the season that we've been waiting for is coming, and soon it will have arrived. As these things pop up, it'll soon feel like we are forced to slow down to really take it all in. As winter gives way to spring, we know that the great state of Indiana is going to pop up our favorite signs of spring, the traffic cone, separating off where there's about to be road construction. Soon the sweet smell of asphalt will fill the air. The wonderful songs of the big rigs will be playing, and it will remind us of hours we've spent in traffic on US 31, where it's gone for some reason from 4 lanes to 1, because that's what we need. Is there anything so reminiscent of spring? Okay, maybe you don't feel the same way about road construction as I do, apparently. It's really nobody's favorite thing to have to deal with, but it is something that we're going to have to deal with at some point in time in our lives, because potholes in Indiana are so massive, and for whatever reason, all of our government officials seem to be under the belief there is a more efficient way for us to get to where we're going. And I do have to admit that as much as I don't like road construction, the last couple of years, as they've done all this construction on US 31, it has really cut down the driving time between here and Indianapolis. And for my wife, who works in Carmel, she's really benefited from this sort of thing because it's made her morning drive much smoother, much more pleasant, and a lot easier to deal with. Although she still doesn't quite like the roundabouts that are in Carmel. Those are weird, and I don't understand why that's a better way than just stop signs. But, I'm not in charge of that. It'd be really fun if I was. But anyway, so as much as I hate sitting in traffic jams because other folks behind me seem to think that the whole lane closing sign that showed up 3 miles ago was just a joke, and I'm forced to go from 65 to 15 miles an hour, as much as I don't like that, I have to recognize that that's the price that we have to pay for progress. But it never fails that once I've sat in that traffic line and I've been slowly inching my way forward for miles at this point in time before I ever see a big rig, it never fails that when I finally do get up to see where they're actually doing construction on the road, it's like this every single time. There are about 25 to 30 guys, all wearing the orange vests and the hard hats. They're clearly there for road construction, but of those 25 to 30 guys, there's only like 3 or 4 of them that look like they're doing anything. Now, before we press forward, please let me give this, disclaimer, if you will. I don't know the full story of what's going on there. I don't work in road construction. I have no desire to work in road construction in my life. If there's not air conditioning, I'm out. But I only get to see these guys for a few seconds, and in those few seconds, this is the same picture that I always have. And even though I know that I'm sure these guys are working hard all the time, I can't stop the thought that pops in my brain every single time. I can't stop it. It just pops in there, and then I can't get rid of it. And I have that same thought, and you probably have it too. Wouldn't this go much faster if all of you were doing your job? Couldn't we get through this road construction a little smoother, a little faster, and a little bit more efficiently if all 25 to 30 of you at least pretended that you were doing something instead of just the 3 or 4? Again, I don't see the full picture. I'm not in road construction, thank God, because I'd make just the worst road you've ever seen. But that's just the way it always seems. And it's like this in other places too. Probably the most prominent place I see it too is also when I go through fast food. I don't go through fast food drive-thrus as often as I used to. I still do it more frequently than I ought to because I'm, a busy guy with kids who are active in sports now. So drive-thru sometimes the only option you've got. But it never fails that when I get through, I order my food, I get up to the window, I always like to look in. I don't know why. I'm not that guy who just sits there and looks at his phone. I look in there to see, you make a human connection, if you will. And every time I look in the window, I see 1 or 2 people who are actually moving around, getting things accomplished, and then I see 3 or 4 people who are standing around talking or looking at their phones. And that's kind of frustrating because you got that window of opportunity where you're waiting. But then there's one particular fast food joint that I won't mention by name, but it has yellow, you could say golden, arches. At the last several times that I've gone through there for fast food, fast being the descriptive there, they've asked me from the window to please go pull into a parking space to wait even more. I don't go to fast food because I think it's gourmet. I go to fast food because I'm in a hurry and I don't have any other options right now. And so you're telling me to go and wait, and when I looked in the window, the person who just told me to go and wait was scrolling through Instagram. Maybe do your job, and we can get this done faster. It's kind of like when you were a kid and your teacher would say the worst words that nobody ever wanted to hear. Group project. Now, let me rephrase that. I was one of the students who hated to hear the word group project because I knew whoever they saddled me up with, I was going to be the busiest one, while the other three would coast along, trusting me to get this done. That made it frustrating because it meant I was doing the job that was assigned to 3 or 4 other people, and that I was the one who had to work hard in order to get this done. Whereas if my friends would have chipped in and joined in on this, then not only would we get this project done faster, it would look better, we'd all probably get a better grade. There's one in particular group project I can recall. I'm the reason why everybody got a B, because I was the one who did all the work. And because I was the only one doing anything, it didn't look as great as it could have, and my teacher gave us all a B. I still feel like I deserve the A on that one. I'll get over it eventually, much like I will the Super Bowl. Anyway, it's incredibly frustrating, though, when everyone has a similar job to do, when everybody's been assigned essentially the same job, but only a handful of people are actually working to accomplish it. Each one of us was given the same thing to accomplish, but it seems like only a few people are even trying to give it a chance. Some of the others might feel like they don't want to work that hard for a variety of different reasons. Maybe it's because they don't know what it is that they're supposed to be doing. Maybe it's they don't know how to get started in the midst of all of that, and the idea of getting started is so ominous, and they're not really sure where to even begin with all of that. They don't think that they can do the job, so why bother with it at all? Or maybe they think that those who are doing the job are doing such a great job, that's not going to matter if they do it or not. Whatever the case may be, it seems like so few are willing to work and so many are willing to not. But for the ones who are actually doing the work, this creates a whole lot of other problems and other issues to deal with. It's hard to be the one who's doing the work when it feels like everybody else who was assigned the same job isn't doing their job. That they're not pulling it. You feel like you've got to work 2 to 3 to 4 times as hard in order to accomplish what needs to be done. And in doing so, you're going to lead yourself into all sorts of exhaustion, and you're going to feel upset. And you're even going to get burnt out faster in the midst of all of that because you're the only one who's even trying to get the job done. What really makes this whole thing frustrating, though, is how not only how unavoidable it is, but what can actually happen when everybody is working hard at it, when everybody is trying to do the job. Not only does the work get done faster when it's more than just a handful of people doing it, it gets done better, and those of us working together, we feel a sense of fulfillment, even, dare I say, enjoyment when we're all working together. It's fun to work on anything with more people, right? I remember as a kid, Dad would have us go pick up rocks in the field, and those few times where like our uncles or cousins even would come and join us. Those were more fun. Nobody thinks that picking up rocks in a field is a fun job. But when you got other people that you can start throwing dirt clods at each other while you're waiting to find a rock, and then your Uncle Jamie jumps off the tractor and tackles your brother and force feeds dirt into his mouth because he caught him right in the eye, and you get to watch that, it makes the job a lot more fun. But it's more enjoyable when we're all working together. Things get done more accomplished, and it creates a sense of passion for the work that you're doing as well. It creates a level of excitement. It creates an environment that not only adds to the sense of excitement and fulfillment of everyone working, but it becomes attractive to those who are on the outside, who see what's going on, and they want to come and join in the midst of that because that looks like such a fun place to work. It seems to be a great place to go and do the work that's in front of you because a lot can happen when everyone assigned to the task takes ownership of it and do the best work that they can laid out in front of them. This is probably why Jesus didn't exactly single anyone out to do the work that he assigns in our text today. We're going to find ourselves in Matthew chapter 10. We're going to go through verses 1 through 16. So go ahead and turn there if you would, please. Put your thumb in your Bible or just leave your Bible app open to that particular text. So we're going to get there eventually. But before we do that, let me get us caught up from where we left things off last week. Because if we're really honest about it, where we left things off last week, Jesus is not exactly making a whole lot of friends with Pharisees and other religious leaders. Last week we talked about this idea that Jesus was going around and he was building his discipleship base. He was building those who were going to be his closest followers, and he chose somebody that made absolutely no sense. He walked right up to a tax collector, a traitor to his own people, somebody working for the state of Rome. This human scum. And he told him, "Follow me." Not only was that disturbing enough to the Pharisees and the other the other religious leaders, but Jesus also found himself shortly thereafter at a dinner party with other tax collectors and other people who were notorious for their sin. The things that they had done thinking that were private had become public knowledge, and it built a reputation for him. He found himself in the midst of a party with the outskirts of society. And when the Pharisees brought this to the attention of Jesus' disciples, Jesus had the audacity to actually quote Scripture in proving why these are exactly the kind of people that he needed to be around. It's not going to win you a lot of friends with Pharisees when you do that sort of thing. But it was more than that, because after that, Jesus would go around and there'd be all kinds of rumors that would start to swirl around him that he had raised a dead girl. He had stopped the bleeding of someone who everybody in this town knew because she'd been bleeding for 12 years and nobody had been able to help her, but for some reason Jesus was able to do this. He healed a couple of blind guys who could not see, and because of what Jesus had done, they were able to. And now there was even swirling some rumors that Jesus had driven out a demon. And this sort of thing has become kind of the talk of the town. When a person is able to do these sorts of things, people are going to start talking about it, right? And all these people who are around the Pharisees are saying, what a great guy Jesus is. And man, there's something special about this guy. But the Pharisees, well, they're starting to form a different opinion about who Jesus is. And they tell us what that opinion is in Matthew chapter 9, verse 34, where they state, it says, the Pharisees said, it is by the prince of demons that he drives out demons. Yikes. They're starting to think that Jesus is actually working for the enemy, that it's because he is a part of Satan himself that Jesus is able to do all these things. That's a fun reputation to garner, isn't it? But Jesus doesn't let this stop him. He doesn't let the talkings and the ramblings of these idiots prevent him from doing what he's there to do. He's got work left to do. And by the time we get to our text today, he's found the men who are going to round out his disciples. He has found his 12. These are all handpicked guys by Jesus himself. And something that we don't talk about whenever we talk about the 12 disciples, that I think we got to at least acknowledge, is that these guys were picked out of candidates of thousands. If you've ever worked in hiring someone before, sometimes you're going to have to go through a lot of just horrible resumes before you find a handful that are actually going to be worth your time to talk to. Everywhere that Jesus went, he garnered a crowd of people to follow after him, people who came to learn from him. And of those thousands of different people, Jesus set aside 12 individuals who would be his disciples. Now, normally, when a teacher of the law would go and formulate his disciples, he wanted to pick the very best. He wanted to pick the people who had the most scriptural knowledge foundation that there was. He wanted to have the cream of the crop. But the 12 that Jesus picked, I don't think anybody in their right mind would have picked to be disciples. Because not only does he have this former tax collector in his midst, he's also picked out a couple of uneducated fishermen. We've talked about this before. Fishermen weren't exactly known for their brains. You kind of became a fisherman if you were too stupid to be a shepherd. You only became a shepherd if you were too stupid to do anything else. And yet here Jesus has picked out some fishermen to be his disciples. Not only that, he's picked up a bunch of random nobodies that we don't know anything about, what their life was before Jesus. And he's also picked up a zealot. Now, if you don't know what a zealot is, let me give you just a quick background of it. A zealot in this particular time period were people who hated everything to do with Rome. I'm pretty sure that this led to some awkward times between Simon and Matthew. Matthew had been a tax collector working for Rome. Simon's a zealot who hates everything to do with Rome and wants to see it dead. Fun! I would just love to sit on like that first dinner where they're all together. That would have been amazing. But zealots not only hated everything to do with Rome, they would carry around swords that were specifically designed to hook underneath the armor of Roman soldiers so they could kill them and assassinate them quietly. They would also wanted to reestablish the tradition of Israel. They wanted to bring Israel back to the good old days. So you have a former tax collector, a zealot who hates everything to do with Rome. You have a bunch of fishermen and a bunch of random guys who formulate the 12 disciples of Jesus. This is not the kind of crowd that we would expect Jesus to align himself with. But Jesus doesn't just want these guys to hang back and watch and learn. In fact, Jesus wants these guys to know what it means to do the work laid out in front of them. Please understand, in a traditional discipleship relationship, typically the disciple would follow around their teacher and mentor for years. Like when I say follow around, I mean literally everywhere that teacher went, they would follow after. They would do everything they could to try to watch everything that he did, from the time he woke up in the morning to the time he went to bed at night. And then as their disciple, they would try to emulate that sort of thing. If he brushes his teeth and then flosses before he goes to bed, you would start brushing your teeth and flossing before you went to bed. Though I don't think they did that in this time period because dental hygiene wasn't nearly what it is today. You're welcome, Mandy. Anyway. But whatever he would do in his life, you as his disciple would try to emulate that, but it would be years before you were entrusted to do his actual work. You would have to learn every single facet, every single detail of it. It could take you even up to a decade before he would ever entrust you with the work that's laid out in front of you. Most disciples were just given menial little tasks, little things to just kind of see if they're worth their muster. And yet when we get to our text today, Jesus is going to ask his disciples to not just do some small tasks. Jesus is going to tell them to get to work. And understand, I did my best to try to find an estimation as to when this took place in Jesus' ministry. How long had the disciples been with Jesus beforehand? And the best guess that I've gotten, please understand, I am using that word very strongly here. The best guess that I have is that this is only about a year to maybe a year and a half into Jesus' ministry here on earth. The disciples have not been with Jesus his entire ministry up to this point. So maybe for a guy like Matthew, who we just talked about in the last chapter, he's only been with Jesus for a couple of months. And now Jesus is about to give him a pretty huge assignment. We see what the assignment is in Matthew chapter 10, verse 1. It says, Jesus called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out impure spirits, to heal every disease and sickness. He goes on further in verses 7 and 8. And it says that Jesus gives them instructions on what they're supposed to do. It says, as you go, proclaim this message. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, and drive out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. I want you to take a moment, if you would, please, to try to imagine being one of the disciples of Jesus. You haven't been following him for all that long. But over the course of the time that you've seen Jesus and been around him, you have seen him do some pretty incredible stuff that you can't possibly describe on your own. You can't fully comprehend exactly what's just happened. I mean, just in very recent history, you have seen Jesus make blind guys able to see. You have seen Jesus raise the dead. You have seen Jesus heal the sick. You have heard Jesus give these incredible sermons about the kingdom of heaven that are so impactful that it has changed the lives of people around you. You have seen all of this take place, and now Jesus is telling you, your turn. I don't know about you, but all of a sudden, I would be very aware of my inexperience. I would be very aware of my own insecurities because he wants me to go do the same healings, the same resurrections, the same preachings that I've seen him do. This is a type of pressure that has to weigh heavy on them. Right? All of a sudden you find yourself asking if Jesus could only show us how he did these sorts of things, if only Jesus would give us more instructions first, if maybe I'd only taken notes when Jesus was giving that really great sermon, maybe I could recreate it. But Jesus has given them a job to do, and more importantly, and we can't miss this part, Jesus expects them to do the job. take what you've seen in the short amount of time you've been around with me and go do that. That is a daunting task for anyone. But Jesus does give them a few guidelines. He's not just going to send them out there without any other instructions or anything like that. That'd be crazy, right? But listen to the instructions that he does give them. It's in verses 9 through 11. He says, "Do not get any gold or silver or copper to take with you in your belts. No bags for your journey, or extra shirt or sandals or a staff, for the worker is worth his keep. Whatever town or village you enter into, search there for some worthy person and stay at their house until you leave." Whew. Don't take any money with you. Don't pack any extra clothes. And be ready to stay in a stranger's house. Those are fun guidelines, right? I don't know about you, but this is the sort of thing that's difficult for me to wrap my brain around, because whenever I go on a trip of any kind, no matter what it is, I want to plan ahead with a place to stay. Right? I want to know, where am I going to go put my head tonight whenever I'm heading towards this trip? That's the first thing I got to cross off my list. Mandy knows this. Whenever we're planning a vacation, step one for me is to get on Vrbo or Airbnb or whatever and figure out, where are we staying. Then the next thing he tells them is, don't pack up anything to go with you. Ugh. I'm a big guy. Big guys tend to be sweaty. I go through t-shirts like some people go through water sometimes. So I need extra clothing. I need all kinds of stuff. Whenever I'm there, I want to make sure I've got plenty of stuff to go with me. If Mandy's the one who's packing, we're bringing a lot of stuff that we're never going to touch while we're on that trip. I cleared it with her. She said it was okay for me to take that dig. I'm not going to look that way because she may feel differently today, but we're going to pack up whatever we need and a few things that we don't for this trip. And Jesus is telling them, don't do that. I'm also going to make sure, if I'm going on a trip, I'm going to have plenty of money to spend. That I'm going to be able to take care of whatever meal I'm going to need to buy. I'm going to have enough money to be able to make sure that my family can go through at least the Chick-fil-A drive-thru to make sure that we're covered. And yet Jesus is looking at his disciples, telling them to go do a task they've never done before, and you can't have any of this stuff with you. I've really thought about the inevitable question here. I think there's a question that comes up whenever we think about Jesus giving them this particular guideline, a question that is unavoidable in the midst of this, and that's the question of why. Why is Jesus telling them, don't take anything, don't do anything, don't bring anything, don't plan ahead, don't do this? Why? And I've thought a lot about that particular question, and I think it goes back to what we discussed in week 1 of this series. If you recall, in week 1 we talked about Jesus going in the desert to face temptation. And we asked the question, why would God allow his son to be in a position where he might consider making a choice that goes against the Father? And if you remember, we resolved that it's because he wanted Jesus to learn dependence on God. That he knew what was facing Jesus was going to be difficult. And that if Jesus was going to make it through this, he would have to depend on God for everything to get him through this entire time of his ministry. And I think by Jesus telling these guys, don't bring stuff, don't bring money, and be ready to stay in somebody's house you don't know, I think he's teaching them to be dependent on God to do the work that God has laid out before them. To trust that in the midst of all of this, God is going to be at work. And he's going to be at work in every single facet, because these disciples have no idea what they're getting themselves into. And yet, if they're going to make it through this, if they're going to be able to do the work of Jesus himself, it's only going to become because God was at work through them. If they're going to be able to provide for themselves, to be able to eat, to be able to do all the stuff that they need to do, it's going to be because God is going to provide for them. See, understand, when Jesus asked these 12 inexperienced men, who are just the weirdest bunch of guys that any teacher ever assembled, when he asked them to go and do this work, Jesus already knew they're probably not going to be great right away. They're going to be nervous. They're not going to know where to start. They're not going to know how to handle all of this work. He took all of that into account before he asked them to do the job. And he told them the way you're going to get through this, the way this work is going to take place is going to be because God is at work amongst you. He would tell them in verse 16, I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Be as shrewd as snakes, be innocent as doves. This is going to be difficult for them. But Jesus still expects them to do the work he's laid out and to trust that God is going to work through them in the midst of all of this. The thing about it is, folks, is that literally every single one of us in here, at least nearly every single one of us in here, we know that we've been given a similar job as the disciples. I could stand right up here today and do as I've done several times beforehand. I could quote Matthew 28, 19 and 20 again, saying, therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you, and surely I am with you always, even to the end of the age. I could tell you that one again. I can make the same observation you've heard me make before, that Jesus was not singling out any one disciple in particular, but rather this was a command for all who would come to follow after him, that this was something that was not just for the 12 or the 11 at this point in time that were in front of him. It's also for every single one who comes to follow after Jesus Christ. That is a command for each and every one of us. If we profess ourselves to be a Christian, then this is a command for us. I can make that observation again, but you've heard that. You've heard it from me. You've heard it from other guys like me. You've heard it come from this stage. You've heard it come from other stages. You know all this. We know that Jesus has an expectation of his followers to go and preach and lead other people to him. And yet, even though this work has been assigned to all of us, statistics don't lie. Far too few Christians are actually taking ownership of this work. We'll sit around and we'll look at the words of the assignment. We'll marvel at them. We'll analyze the words and the phrasing. We'll try to figure out exactly what the nuances of that assignment are. We'll even go on and on about how powerful the professment of that assignment is, but are we actually doing it? Here's the thing. An assignment's only good if you're actually doing the assignment. We like to look at the words. We like to study them, to analyze them, to just research them over and over and over again. But here's the problem with that. That's safe. That's comfortable. But to actually step out and do the assignment, that's scary. That's intimidating. What if I go and tell my coworker about Jesus and he rejects everything that I got to say? Maybe worse, what if they ask a question I don't know the answer to? What if they want to know what's the next step and I don't know how to answer that? What if they present an argument that I don't know the points against? To actually do the work is intimidating. But here's the thing, folks, I got to think it was intimidating for these 12. These 12 who were around Jesus, who heard less than you have heard, who have learned less than you have learned. And yet Jesus sent them out anyway, expecting them to go and do the work, to trust and rely on God. Don't arrange for housing, trust God. Don't take extra clothing, trust God. Don't take any money, trust God. See, here's the thing. When Jesus first gave this assignment to go and preach, he factored in the weakness of his disciples. I'm a firm believer that God has already factored in your weakness. He's already factored in your failing. He's already factored in all the ways that you can come up with as to why you shouldn't do this. And he's done this in the past too, right? We saw this back all the way with Moses. Moses had a speech impediment of some kind. We don't have any descriptive as to what it was. Maybe it was a lisp. Maybe he stuttered. We don't really know. What did God do? Took that argument away, didn't he? Said, no, this is still going to happen. You're still going to do this. This is still your assignment. God has called each and every single one of us as Christians to go and to preach that gospel to everyone around us. And God wouldn't do that if you didn't already know what your argument is to why you can't do that. But here's the reality, folks, and this is what we can't miss. We can still accomplish this because God is going to work through us. He would not give us an assignment and then trust that we're just going to get it done. He would not give us an assignment without knowing all the ways that we might mess it up. But if we trust in Him, He's going to continue to work through us in spite of our weaknesses, in spite of the ways that we fail, in spite of all the things that we're afraid of. God will work through us in ways that we can't even begin to imagine. Far and away, the main reason why the church has not been effective in reaching the lost in our communities is because we are so unwilling to go and do the work. Some of us are doing that work, absolutely, for sure. But there are far more who aren't. And here's the thing, when more people are willing to do the work, regardless as to what the job is, the work feels lighter. When more people are willing to come alongside of us and work, the work feels lighter. When more Christians are willing to do the work of God, more people come to know God. Understand, there are people in your life that you are the only person who can reach them. You can reach them in ways that I can't. You can reach them in ways that the person sitting next to you can't. Because God has placed you in the situations that you are currently in to do the work of God. The more of us that will adopt the willingness to do the work, the more of us that are willing to go and do the work of God, the faster that Macedonia Christian Church will impact our community in the name of Jesus Christ. More people working towards the same goal doesn't just get the job done faster, though. It creates a passion for the work itself. And every single church growth expert, I'm not really sure what a church growth expert is, but every single church growth expert will tell you the most effective tool for churches to evangelize in their communities is not a new sound system. It's not a light show, it's not a fog machine, it's not a style of worship, it's not a electric guitar. The most effective tool for churches to reach out to their communities, to evangelize them, to change them in the name of Jesus is, was, and always will be passion within that church. When this church is passionate about doing the work of God, when this church is passionate about fulfilling the assignment that God has given us, when this church is passionate about what God has laid before us and expects us to do, people on the outside are going to see that, and that's going to become attractive to them. I am a firm believer that passion outweighs talent every time. Right? If you ever watch any sporting event, you can have a team filled with all kinds of talent, but if they don't have passion, they're going to lose. They're going to get outweighed by the team who's got a bunch of scrappy guys who'd be on the bench anywhere else, but man, just love it. Because passion will outweigh talent every single time. Passion doesn't mean that we're more gifted or a better speaker or anything like that. It just means that we care about the work that God has laid before us. I don't know how you feel. I can't tell you how you feel. I can tell you what I feel, though. I genuinely believe that Macedonia Christian Church has the ability to change the community around us. You could look at our location and think, well, that's a weakness in our favor, or a weakness in our column because we're in the middle of a cornfield, right? We're not that close to Kokomo, we're not that close to Greentown. I'd look at that as an opportunity because it means that we can draw from Greentown, from Kokomo, from Sharpsville, from Bunker Hill, from fill in the blanks of the communities here. But that's only going to happen when we get passionate about doing the work that God has placed in front of us, that we are willing to do the work that God has done us. God has given each one of us a task. So let's all get to work. I find it a little ironic, even though I think it was probably planned this way, that just before the text that we've discussed today, just before Jesus sends off the 12, just before the events that we have been discussing, Matthew 9, verses 36 through 38 would say this, and we'll close with it. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send the workers into his harvest fields.